So the first vehicle we're going to be covering today was created as a result of a recommendation by MEAG in early 1942 for a new heavy reconnaissance tank to serve either alongside the VK-16.02 Leopard or replace the Leopard based on the Panther 1. The turret to be used on this tank and on the Leopard was originally designed by Daimler-Benz for the Panzer ARK, with the gun's development being contracted out to Krupp and Rheinmetall. The only change that was to be made to this turret for this vehicle and the Leopard would be a minor armor increase, though the amount of this increase is unfortunately unspecified. The projected delivery date for this reconnaissance Panther as well as the Leopard was to be October or November 1942, but neither would ever see construction. Despite not reaching its production date of 1942, it would strangely appear in January of 1943 in a disposition filed by the Waffenamt, which would show that 150, quote, light Panthers, armed with 50mm cannons, were set to be produced in October 1943, alongside 10 Mauschen and 10 ultra-heavy self-propelled guns based on the Tiger I, but this also seemingly went nowhere. Unfortunately, there is very little information on the Aufpanther, as it's known, but one thing is certain. Even in 1942, the 50mm KWK-39 was already approaching inadequacy, and if the paper filed by the Waffenamt is to point to its potential production date of October 1943, by that point, the gun would have been completely ineffective. The ironic part of this whole proposal was that it would get rid of the best aspect of the Panther, that being its high-powered 75mm KWK-42. But by far, one of the funniest aspects of this whole proposal is that the lighter turret would decrease the overall weight, thus reducing the strain on the drivetrain, potentially improving reliability. Now this next thing was a project based on the KV-7 for a 152mm self-propelled gun, which was first commenced in the spring of 1942. If you want to know a lot more about the KV-7, then I would recommend this video right here, which I will link in the description. Now, the original installation for the 152mm ML-20 was to be handled by number 172 NKV factory. However, this was quickly handed over to OKB-3 UZTM, who was in no hurry to develop it, as many other projects had taken top priority, alongside the fact the ML-20 was being produced outside of the OKB-3, which further complicated things. The first draft of what would become the U-18 wouldn't be ready until August 4th, 1942, thanks to lack of interest and also the complicated design work from making the ML-20 fit into the KV-7 superstructure with as little changes as possible. The only instantly noticeable change to the superstructure was the new mount for the gun. This new mount consisted of a frame with movable armor plates inside, which really didn't work very well, as it allowed bullets and shrapnel to pass through freely, which was a result of OKB-3 not being allowed to change certain elements of the superstructure. The ammunition load for this vehicle was to be 60 rounds carried in a separate support vehicle, with the internal load being unknown. The draft was sent to the GABTU on September 3rd, and by the 24th, OKB-3 was informed a similar project had been proposed by Comrade Petrov of Design Bureau No. 8, which was the ZIK-20, which had ditched most of the KV-7's components, but presented a much better gun mount as a result. Even despite of bending the rules, the ZIK-20 would be the one ultimately chosen, with the OKB-3 proposal being subsequently rejected, and the final nail in the coffin would be the commencement of KV-1S production in August 1942, meaning the KV-7 hull the U-18 relied on was no longer needed. In the end, the U-18 would only ever exist as a proposal, and no prototypes were ever constructed. There is one thing that stands out the most when looking at this original proposal, though, and it's just how little space there is in the crew compartment, which, with whatever internal load of ammunition it was supposed to carry, would be an incredibly unpleasant place to work. Now, this project started as the result of a proposal sent directly to Stalin by Chelyabinsk engineers on February 24th, 1943. and was to serve as a replacement for the aging T-70 and T-80 light tanks which had already reached their limitations for further modernization. Surprisingly, this proposal was good enough to catch the attention of the main armored directorate. Now, one of the things that made the MT-25 stand out over the T-70 and the T-80 was its large 3-man turret, which not only allowed for more efficient operation, but also allowed for the potential of upgunning in the future. This, however, was nothing compared to its strangest and craziest aspect, which was its all-wheel drive drivetrain. This drivetrain was supposed to allow the tank to fight even after half the road wheels had been damaged and the tracks had been blown off. Now, keep in mind this system was not entirely new, as it had been designed back in 1934 with the BT-2IS, where the second, third, and fourth pair of road wheels were powered. However, this system failed due to the power being transferred through very brittle drive shafts. In order to avoid this problem, the MT-25 would use a system of gears that ran down the length of the vehicle, which were far more reliable than the old drive shaft system. Strangely, the suspension on this vehicle consisted of interweaving road wheels, which was certainly a departure from the conventional Soviet arrangement. Yet another strange element of this tank's design was the fact the engine was located behind the transmission, which led to a much shorter haul overall. This arrangement allowed for the gearbox and final drives to be serviced from inside the tank. However, the process of replacing said transmission became, complicated. The engine proposed for the MT-25 was the V2K diesel engine. However, the initial claims of a 62-mile-an-hour top speed were quickly placed into doubt. Despite this, the unspecified actual top speed was deemed adequate enough. Now, even though this tank sounds great currently, it was not pursued for two major reasons. The first being the vehicle's predicted weight of 25 tons, which meant the vehicle was officially classed as a medium tank, not the convertible light tank that was hoped for. The second, and arguably much more significant issue, was the amount of equipment and resources required to produce the vehicle matched, if not exceeded, the amount needed for T-34 production, which effectively sealed the MT-25's fate. Now, one issue that was not touched upon in the original document is that if production had gone ahead, the quality of the tanks produced would certainly come into question, as production standards during this time were notoriously low, and would have likely turned the MT-25's innovative drive system into a mechanical nightmare. In the end, the MT-25 would only ever remain a paper project, with no prototypes ever being completed. Now, this vehicle was submitted as part of a series of proposals by Krupp in November 1944. It had been determined that it was possible to mount a Panzer IV turret on the Panzer 38T, albeit with the steepness of the front and sides being increased, meaning factories would have to be retooled to handle the new hull shape. The largest issue that was immediately pointed out was the fact that the mechanical traversing gear would have to be dropped to get the turret in, which lowered the traverse speed to a point that Vauproof 6 determined that the vehicle presented no advantage over the current Jagdpanther 38. The weight of the vehicle was also projected to be 16 tons, which was a full ton over the 15-ton capacity of the road wheels. This weight increase would also make the already slow and overtaxed drivetrain even more so, as well as increasing the ground pressure. This project would ultimately go nowhere and would only ever remain a basic schematic. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and state this because I don't want to be yelled at. It is unclear if these two vehicles are even real in the first place. It should be noted that there does exist a photo of a turret that looks very similar to the turret planned for these two tanks that was in Manchuria. However, there is no known official Japanese documents or schematics that feature either vehicle. The only two sources that potentially point to this tank's existence is a vague Soviet document covering cooling systems in Japanese tanks, which references the Type 2604 and 2605, as well as a rough sketch of the external profile and internal layout of the Type 2605, also created by the Soviets. In regards to the document referencing the cooling system, it states that the Type 2604 was to be powered by two BMW 12-cylinder naval engines with a beyond complex system of 3 radiators and 1 oil radiator per engine, which would then be cooled by 2 large central ventilators, which were powered by the engines. Cool air was to be pulled into the engine bay via a series of large grills at the center of the engine compartment, which would likely give the vehicle more than enough air to prevent overheating. At least that's what was predicted. This document also reveals the details and changes made on the Type 2604's possible successor, the Type 2605, such as the engine compartment being lowered by 35%, which was done to potentially save weight, but not really much else is known outside of this change. Unfortunately, this document does not list what the Type 2605's engine would be, or engines, I should say. As mentioned earlier, a series of sketches exists of the Type 2605, which these show the vehicle possibly adopting a more German-style suspension system in the form of interweaving road wheels. However, this also could simply be an asymmetrical torsion bar suspension, like that of the Soviets. This sketch also reveals another interesting detail, which is the move away from the OI's multi-turreted layout, as well as the shift from a rear-mounted transmission like that of the OI to a front-mounted transmission. Both of these vehicles were projected to carry large-caliber naval guns, with the most commonly agreed upon being the 14cm/50 third-year type naval gun. Unfortunately, armor and performance information does not exist on either of these vehicles. Despite Soviet records, there still does not exist any concrete proof on the existence of either vehicle, and some have suggested that the records were either outright fabricated or were merely a misinterpretation of the OI. Now, assuming this project was real, this would have been a truly horrible piece of kit, as it would have suffered from all the same problems as the OI, however now you take it and dial it up to 11. The only purpose this vehicle could have served is as a mobile coastal gun, and even then it would have been useless, as it likely was not fast enough to escape enemy counter-battery fire. Now, this vehicle was also part of that series of proposals submitted by Krupp in 1944. Krupp had determined it was fundamentally possible to install a 128mm anti-tank gun into the Jagdpanther, the gun selected being the 128mm Pak 80 L55. The issue with this proposal was that the vehicle would have to be changed to a rear-mounted casemate configuration, with the engine being moved to the center of the vehicle, which meant that factories would yet again have to be retooled. This central engine arrangement would also cause problems with heat haze distorting the gunner sight, as well as separating the driver and radio operator from the rest of the crew. Engine maintenance would also be complicated, as the gun would have to be removed to remove the engine. Despite this enormous change, the crew space was to be incredibly limited, and the weight of the vehicle would be increased to a whopping 51 tons, further increasing the Jagdpanther's already infamous mechanical failure rate. This new 128mm gun would also have a much lower rate of fire due to the use of two-piece ammunition, which was further complicated by the aforementioned cramped crew space. In the end, Vopproof 6 was anything but impressed with the proposal and would label it as a lame duck, and concluded that the current 88mm Pak 43 would suffice for a long time. All that would ever come from this project was a simple schematic. Well, it is yet again with great sadness I must say that more of my brain cells have paid the ultimate cost. But anyway, I hope you all enjoyed the video. I know I say that every video, but I can't really think of anything better to say, so I don't know. Well, I know this was quite a departure, but I hope that the return of the worst tank concepts of World War II was something that you were all looking forward to. Next video will be that quote-unquote comprehensive review of World of Tanks, and I emphasize quote-unquote, because you are not going to get me to make a 1-hour essay on it. And, I'd also just want to wish you all a Merry Christmas, and, a Happy New Year as well. And I really don't know what else to say here. I've already padded out the runtime here enough, so, bye, I guess?
You got owned!